Minister, I note that the Education Amendment Bill provides for a number of important changes to the Education Act 1998 and the Teaching Council Act 2001. And most notably, it aims to ensure that all teachers in schools be registered with the Teaching Council and are fully qualified and suitable for the essential role that they play, that they're expected to play in the education of our children. And I would certainly agree that any improvements that can be made to existing legislation that ensures teaching personnel are of the highest professional standard is to be welcomed. And it is vitally important that the well-being of children being taught in Irish classrooms is a top priority for this government and this society. Last evening, our party spokesperson on education, Deputy Sean Crowe, gave our party's considered response to this bill, and he outlined what we see as good, and he outlined and he identified areas where we felt changes or feel changes might be needed, and outlined what those changes might be. And I do not propose to repeat the points that were made by Deputy Crowe last night. However, I will say that there's something very wrong where we have a child population going up and newly qualified teachers have to emigrate. To me, that just doesn't make any sense. And I think it's unfair and indeed discriminatory that newly qualified teachers, including those with the highest qualifications, should be paid considerably less than their peers who are already working in the system. And inevitably this is going to lead to worsening of morale throughout among staff in our school system. And I think that should be reversed immediately. And I'll also say that I will be looking to ensure that the very public pledge that was given by Minister John Perry, that no rural schools in Sligo North Leitrim, forgive me for being parochial, that no rural schools in Sligo North Leitrim would close under his watch, that pledge will be honoured in full. And I'll be watching that place closely. Now, Minister, I'm going to move on from talking about what's in the bill, because I want to speak about what is not in the bill, but should be. There remains, Minister, this is something I've said before, there remains a very serious gap in Irish education legislation that is not addressed in the bill. And that's the issue of how we handle allegations of abuse or bullying or emotional abuse of pupils by teachers. The Minister and the Department of Education profess that they're powerless to intervene in such matters, that it's up to the individual school's Board of Management to process any complaints or allegations of abuse or bullying made against teachers. Minister, that's not delegation of responsibility, that's abdication of responsibility. It's not child welfare or protection, it's institutional welfare and protection. Now, I don't want for a moment to overstate the scale or extent of this problem. I do know that the vast majority of teachers are good, committed professionals who adhere to the highest possible standards. But if teacher bullying or psychological or physical abuse of children happens even once, it is too often. And it's clearly a flawed system when you, Minister, and the Department of Education provide funding for educational institutions but have no oversight or input to the protection of children within that education system. And I think it's incredible. You, Minister, responded to a PQ of mine on the parliamentary question of mine on the 16th of November 2011. There is no requirement for school authorities to report incidents or allegations of bullying to my department. My department, therefore, does not maintain data in this regard. However, in the course of the reply to the same PQ, Minister, you said, I have no plans to introduce any additional legislation as suggested by the Deputy. How can it be right that a parent or child who alleges bullying by a teacher has no recourse except to the Board of Management of the school, who would in most cases be close friends of the teacher subject of the complaint? And how can it be right that the Minister and the Department cannot investigate serious complaints against teachers and cannot instruct schools to follow a particular course of action with regard to individual complaint cases? School boards of management, they're not independent, qualified, autonomous bodies capable of investigating allegations of abuse against teachers. They're part of a system, and they will protect the system and will protect those who work in that system. School boards of management do exceptional work the length and breadth of this country, but they simply cannot and should not be regarded as independent, qualified judges when dealing with allegations of abuse against teachers in their schools. We've all seen ourselves in relatively recent history the consequences of closing our eyes and pretending all is rosy behind closed doors. And have we learned nothing from that? Minister, I'm arguing again that legislation urgently needs to be brought forward to enable you and the Department of Education to work with the HSE to investigate and resolve allegations of teacher bullying or teachers psychologically damaging children. An approach such as that would ensure that children are assessed by HSE professionals who are trained in the area of child welfare and involving professionals from the Department of Education who are trained in school policy, procedures and responsibilities. And that would also ensure that there's a uniformly standard, professional, accountable process nationally to deal with such allegations. Minister, you're aware, because I brought it to your attention, I sent you the file of a young boy from County Sligo who has been out of school now for over 2 years because he was wrongly accused in public of bullying by a school principal. Despite exhaustive efforts by this boy's parents, which involved correspondence and discussions with politicians, civil servants, the school principal, Board of Management, National Education Welfare Board and HSE, the case is as far from resolution as ever. An eminent psychologist has testified to the great damage being done to this child and has indicated that the process of recovery can only begin when the school principal clears the boy's name and reputation publicly in the eyes and ears of the school population. Yet nothing has happened, and this boy is still at home over 2 years later. He's 16 and a half. He's desperately unhappy. He's not mixing with his peers, spends all his time at home, but has on occasions threatened to run away from home and worse. And his parents, Minister, they're at their wits' end. They've spent the last 2.5 years of their lives trying to have this matter resolved. They have tried every avenue except civil legal action, but they always run into an official cul-de-sac, into a cul-de-sac of official impotence. This good and decent family, they've lost all respect for politicians and for the political system, including they have lost respect for me, because although I want to, I am unable to bring about the change that's needed. And they ask, with understandable grounds, how can any political system that claims to cherish and protect children allow such a situation to continue with no avenue of address, let alone redress? They're angry, they're frustrated and they're disillusioned that politicians and the political system cannot see the wrong and correct it immediately. And they spend sleepless nights wondering how their son can survive this cruel episode unscathed. You before, Minister, I said, and I agree with you on this, it's disgraceful and it should not be tolerated in any civilised society. Minister Quinn, I would take you to be a compassionate, caring and very committed person. Could you put yourself into the shoes of these parents and imagine for one moment what your life would be like if one of your young children were going through this ordeal. I think that you know that it's wrong that this boy is a prisoner in his own home, and that his psychological development has been greatly damaged by the failure, not of the school system, by the failure of our legislative system to provide access to justice in this case. Home tuition, in fairness, is being provided in this case, but that is not the solution. The solution lies in legislating for an open, transparent, professional, independent, competent and accountable system to process allegations of abuse against teachers. And I think it's deeply disappointing that the bill before us contains nothing to address this. Recently, Minister, I joined with our party spokesperson in education, Deputy Crowe, and our Senator Catherine O'Reilly for a meeting with members of the National Anti-Bullying Coalition. During that meeting, it became very clear to me that bullying of teachers and bullying by teachers is not uncommon. It does happen. So what I'm talking about is not an isolated incident, but that is notoriously difficult to resolve short of civil legal action. We would certainly commend the NABC for the very important job that they're doing in addressing the many types of bullying that takes place within primary and secondary schools, tragically leading in some cases to mental health problems, incidents of self-harm and indeed suicide. We support the work of the NABC and the implementation of the Safe School programme, which introduces accredited measures to address bullying and is based on empirical research and best practices in other countries, like, for example, Finland. Minister, you hold the key to this. You hold the key to ensuring that young people, like my young constituent and his parents, can get justice. You have the right, you have the power, and I would argue you have a responsibility to amend this bill to incorporate the points that I have raised. We won't be able to say, and we cannot say, that we don't know what's going on. We know what's going on. We can't and would never prejudge the outcome of any investigation, but we know that there has to be a process to allow an investigation to be held. We cannot say that we're unaware of the potentially very serious consequences for this young lad from Sligo and his parents, and for possibly hundreds and perhaps thousands of pupils and parents throughout Ireland. Minister, I believe that my job in opposition is not simply to oppose policy, and I never thought it was simply to oppose policy, and I believe it would be wrong of me to just oppose for opposition's sake. I believe that my job here as an opposition TD includes helping government to make better choices, better decisions, better policies and better legislation. And I take that responsibility seriously. And in this spirit, I would gladly work with you and with your officials to sort this out. And I've no doubt that an amendment along the lines that I've laid out would receive extensive cross-party support. So, Minister, will you turn that key by agreeing to incorporate such an amendment? And if you do so, you will not only initiate much needed legislation, you will be offering hope and a restoration of trust in the democratic system to these parents in Sligo, and I would say to parents and students throughout the country.